All right, everybody, welcome. Welcome to the In-Out Summer Symposium. Welcome to Moore College of Art and Design. I am Daniel Tucker. I'm the Graduate Program Director for the new Social and Studio Practices program here at Moore. You can learn all about our new program here. There's also students from the program spread throughout the room, sprinkled strategically, so you can talk to them as well about how they're enjoying their summer here in our Lowe residency graduate program. When Moore and Mural Arts decided to have a partnership, one of the things that we initially settled on was that we wanted to have a convening. We wanted to celebrate the ways that both of our organizations were working in the city and in the world, and we also wanted to invite people to come into our spaces as well as organize occasions to go out into the city together in a formal and organized way around a sort of a line of inquiry. The line of inquiry for this gathering is the subject of time. The way that we came to this subject was thinking about sort of what are the questions or the forms or the ideas that people sort of never really put their finger on but seem to be kind of running through what everyone is doing and thinking about. One of those had to do with how time commitment is a sort of hidden medium that we never really see, but we feel the evidence of in all sorts of ways, both good and bad, depending on how the time commitment is organized. And that was a kind of critical question that we wanted to inquire about this year with our inaugural gathering. So I'm going to leave it at that, short and sweet. The way this day is going to unfold is we're going to have a keynote from Lowe from Project Row Houses, and then we're going to go out into the city and have trolley tours for those of you that pre-registered for them. Additionally, after that, we're going to have a gathering at Asian Arts Initiative. All of this is laid out in your program, and so I won't go into detail about addresses and time, but I hope to see you there. Tomorrow, the gathering is going to take place here at Moore in our auditorium just around the corner. And so I hope to see you there. And the last thing that I want to say is that because this is the inaugural year of our Social and Studio Practices program, we have students in our social engagement and community practice graduate programs who are going to be introducing each of the panelists and speakers. And so I just wanted to sort of throw that out there. That's something that it's not in the program, but it's something that we'll be hearing from graduate students before each of the speakers. So at this point, I'm going to hand off to my co-organizer, Mural Arts Scholar in Residence, Paul Farber, and we'll hear a little bit from him about the role of Mural Arts in this process, and then move on with our day. Thanks for being here.
Hello everyone, and good afternoon. It's a huge treat to be here with you for this action-packed day here at the Moore College of Art and Design, and to go out into the field. Before we begin, we want to make sure to thank all of you for being here, and also to help us thank really a great fabric and of participants and organizations who help make this day possible. First, we're here because of this exciting partnership between the City of Philadelphia Mural Arts Program and Moore College of Art and Design, and we're very grateful for our site visits at Village of Art and Humanities, Neighborhood Time Exchange, and Asian Arts Initiative. For a convening on time, we'll be thinking conceptually, but also quite practically. And what we want to be able to do is pack in as much in this day as possible and keep it moving. So as a way to keep focused, we're going to be here. We're going to hear this great keynote, and then for those of you who've pre-registered, we're going to go out to different sites. I want to note that there are, as the site visits are happening, that they're concurrent. So some of you will be going to the Village, and others will be going to Time Exchange, and then we'll switch. But all of us will end up this evening at the party at Asian Arts Initiative. As we reflect on time and think about time commitment, time as a resource, but also time as a catalyst for creative work, We are very thrilled to have one of the engines behind this partnership, Jane Golden, Executive Director of the City of Philadelphia Mural Arts Program, to also join us.
Hi everyone. Oh, I see so many friends here today. Welcome. This is so great. So let me give you some background because I think context is important. So when Cecilia Fitzgibbon became president of Mural, I went to her and I said, you know what, we would love to work with you at Mural Arts. We've started something the last few years called Mural Lab. It's like our think tank. We're looking at practices around the country, the world. We've had a visiting curator series. People are really challenging us and pushing us and getting us to sort of be like facile and fluid. And we want to be sort of a learning center, but we can't do it alone and we need partners. We need institutional partners. So she said, okay, right here, Moore College of Art. And she said, we're really interested in art and social practice. We're starting new graduate programs. And so we cooked up this plan so that we could be like a laboratory for these new graduate programs. And then I had the great fortune to meet Daniel Tucker, who's like fantastic. And so in working with Daniel, we cooked up even more plans that included this symposium that brings us here today. And it's like so exciting because you know how you start with something, it's just like this little thought, and then it becomes a reality, and it's like shocking. So I'm just so grateful to everyone who helped make it happen. So we have been creating art in communities for a long time. And before people used the term co-creation or co-collaboration or socially engaged public art, like we were, meeting with people in kitchens and churches and rec centers and talking to people about what they would like on their wall. And we really didn't know what we were doing, but we had this instinct that what we should do is really listen, to ask many more questions, to not make assumptions, to not assume we knew more than people in the communities where we were working. We were serving. That's what I like to say. Because we were and are public servants to a certain extent. And that's an important term to me personally and to our organization. And what we saw is that collaborations could be created and sustained, like changes would happen. And I got to see these changes, with my very eyes. And that was nothing short of being an honor and a privilege. I'll always be grateful to the Anti-Graffiti Network because it gave me access to Spencer and Wilson Good, gave me access to communities and neighborhoods, unlike anyone else could. I was an outsider. And so I always feel like that work was getting like 3 graduate degrees. And when we became Mural Arts, it was like, okay, we learned a lot. There's a really strong foundation here. And we need to pay close attention to the learnings from back in the day because that's important and it should really inform the way we work. And our work now involves a multitude of practical matters. We're constantly asking ourselves about building capacity, how do we share resources, how do we invest in relationships, how do we value time as a variable in all these factors. The work is complicated. It's far more complex than people think, but I know that many of you in this room who are doing wonderful work understand that. When people encounter a public art project or a mural, they think that's it. But really, the truth is that the paint on the wall is just a small part of that story, the story that started way before when the process begins, and the story continues. It's this incredible narrative arc. It is what social practice is, as I have come to understand it. That it starts when you begin thinking about it and talking to people and working with people collaboratively, together, and then you create something, and then the life that it has afterwards is of equal value to every step that went before it, and that is what is so wonderful. When you look around the city, you see these images that are sometimes small and poignant. A new landscape mural by Paris Stencel at 32nd and Cumberland is moving. It's beautiful, but what was just as moving were the conversations in Strawberry Mansion. In West Philadelphia, project that was created in part by returning vets from Iraq and Afghanistan had real meaning, and on that wall are writings from them. The work that says Rise and Shine by James Burns on North Broad Street has such power, right? Because it was created by 1,000 people struggling with recovery. The work in South Philadelphia, Southeast by Southeast, is about coming to a new country and dealing with issues around trauma and resilience. And that resilience is so moving and inspiring, and in part what drives our work. The curator, Liz Thomas, asks us to see the totality of our work as one long-term, sustained, evolving, ever-in-progress project that functions, and I love this term, as the visualization of democracy. The visualization of democracy, from the early waterfall murals that people asked for because they wanted beauty in their lives, to the portraits you see around the city of neighborhood heroes, or to projects about mass incarceration or homelessness that impacts the young people in the city. Our work ranges from the personal to the political to the lyrical to the urgent. And in doing so, what comes together, we are able to thread together the public, the private, and the civic. And it becomes what Jeremy Noah refers to as informal social contracts that build social capital, that create opportunities. And of most importance, the work is about concretizing and co-creating a vision of public art in our public life. Work that impacts the city, but it's not just about the impact on the city, it's also the impact on us. This process, the experience, the rich interactions with many of you, the community, the artists, is significant because it continually pushes us to be better, more thoughtful, art makers, citizens, civic participants. When we entered into this fascinating opportunity to have this symposium and talk about time, first I was baffled. What do you mean time, right? But I understood it. Somewhere deep in my soul, I understood it because I'm somebody who's always in a rush. Let's get it done, let's get it done, let's do a million things. We have to have impact because you see the needs. You feel the demand for change in the city all the time. When I started working at the Department of Recreation a long time ago, I worked for a man who's deputy mayor now, Mike DeBerardinis, and when he left Recreation, he said to me, you know, Jane, when I came into this department, I wanted a revolution, and I've had to make do with an evolution. And I often think about that, right? Because I've had to make do, too, with an evolution, right? Bureaucracy and Jane Gold, that doesn't always go well together, but yet, we've been able to make it work in the best way possible, and it has been a wonderful experience, and I realize that when you have time, that the change is often more substantive and sustained. And so it's something important for all of us to think about. During this time, the last few years, we have been building our practice in many ways, and part of that is the creation of neighborhood hubs. Southeast by Southeast, and I want to call it Shira Walensky, our brilliant artist, who has helped create that, which is in South Philadelphia, and there we're working with people from Burma, Nepal, and Bhutan. And I mean, everything is in the storefront, from sewing, cooking, dance, ESL, social services. It's like alive and pulsing with activity. It went far beyond anything we could have dreamed about. And we're working with the People's Emergency Center, the city's Arts, Culture, and Creative Economy Office, and to create the Neighborhood Time Exchange on Lancaster Avenue that you will see today. Dave Q is the project manager. Thank you, Dave Q. Like taking this idea, this concept, and Todd Bressi for helping to create that dream. And so we're seeing, we did this with Philly Painting, we did it back in the day with Love Letter, with Steve Powers, that when we embed ourselves in the community over a period of time, things change. Time has always been part of our art making with communities, but we're embracing it now more than ever because we want our relationships to be sustained over long periods of time. And when I look out over time, I see a thread that links all our work, and that is the art making process and the broad range of authors it engages. The range of authors, because there are so many of them: citizens, artists, public agencies, civic groups, students, people in prison, people coming home, shopkeepers, academic institutions. Broad authorship takes time and intention, but I believe, and I believe this with all my heart, it is why the movement it represents is so resilient. We see ourselves in our work, our stories, our aspirations for change. From the earliest work to today's complicated social practice, community-based public art projects, the work belongs to all of us, affording us windows of opportunity, possibility, and hope. We're thrilled to be here today with wonderful artists whom we love, artists who've had a tremendous influence on me and mural arts like Rick Lowe. Together today we will go across the city and we will see these projects, and hopefully you will come away with questions, you'll be inspired, you'll have new ideas. That is exactly what we want. We want this to be a weekend of learning and sharing. Events like this take a lot of work, so I want to thank the Moore President of Cecilia Fitzgibbon, the Graduate Program Director and Assistant Professor Daniel Tucker, the Director of Marketing and Communications, Roy Wilbur, I also want to thank from Mural Arts, our scholar in residence, Paul Farber, our interim director of strategic initiatives and Mural Lab, Todd Bressie, our project manager, Dave Q, our director of development, Caitlin Butler, and our director of communications, Nicole Steinberg. And finally, a huge thank you to the Ford Foundation. Their funds have been an invaluable resource and lifeline for us for many, 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 many years, and their funds have in part made this day possible. And finally, I just want to say that for those of you who know me, you know that I always say that art ignites change. And like, it sounds sort of like a cliche, and sometimes I even feel like totally self-conscious saying it, but I actually believe it. And the privilege of this work is that we get to see changes up front, up close, all the time. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank many of you who are in this room today, who are doing extraordinary work to make this city a better place. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jean. Thanks for that welcome. So at this point in time, we're going to hear from one of our graduate students in the Community Practice MFA program. I want to, before Sara speaks, I want to just get the students in the program, social and studio practice department, the whole grad program, to put their hands up just so you know who they are. Okay, so welcome. So any of these people are here to chat with you, and you can learn what they're up to this summer. And additionally, we have a lot of faculty members from our program here. So can I get a little wave from people who are teaching? Okay, welcome. So please, engage these folks. And then a lot of the rest of you are awesome practitioners. A lot of the rest of you are people that are presenting this weekend. And so I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for us to all corner each other and have side conversations, and also hopefully in the larger public forums today and tomorrow as well. So without further ado, we're going to hear from MFA and Community Practice candidate Sara Pottenger, who's going to introduce us to Rick Lowe.
Good afternoon, my name is Sara Pottenger, and I'm a first-year student in new MFA in Community Practice. And I'm excited to introduce to you our first keynote speaker, someone I look up to and whose work has given me a lot to think about in my own practice. Rick Lowe is a Houston-based artist and community practitioner. He attended Columbus College and studied visual arts at Texas Southern University in Houston. He has exhibited at national and international venues such as Houston's Contemporary Arts Museum and Museum of Fine Arts, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, and the Gwangju Biennale in South Korea, and the Venice Architecture Biennale. Rick Lowe started his career as a painter, often representing politically oriented subjects. At some point early in his career, he was challenged by a young student to use his artistic practice to make real-world change. This was a turning point in his work. He is most well known for his project Row Houses, based on Joseph Boyd's concept of social sculpture. Project Row Houses has created a community through art, revitalizing the inner-city neighborhood of Houston's northern Third Ward. Project Row Houses started out with 22 shotgun houses, which has expanded to 40 properties. It has served as a vital anchor for the neighborhood, providing arts education programs for youth, exhibition and studio residencies for artists, office spaces, a park, a residential mentorship program for young mothers, an organic gardening program. Project Row Houses is often cited as one of the more successful examples of the intersection between art and community development. In 2014, Rick Lowe became a MacArthur Fellow, and he is currently developing a project in Philadelphia with Asian Arts Initiative. Help me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Rick Lowe.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm a little tired today. So I don't have the PowerPoint that I had planned for here because it crashed a little bit ago and I had to rebuild something. So I kind of recrafted from a presentation that I made not too long ago. So I feel like I'm representing something. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to contextualize some images from projects in the context of time. But let me just start by saying a few words about time, because time is in the kind of work that I do, and I think all of you are interested in. You know, it's an obvious element, right? But I also think, like for me, and I also noticed on this slide, I actually have the time in should be in the middle and time in time should be on the outside. But anyway, but I was trying to think of like these different ways to think about time, right? So, you know, to me, this notion about, you know, there's a time before time, you know, like we all have ideas and things that we want to do in time, but it's not time for them yet. So I think of that as like, you know, in time, these things might happen, right? So there's this whole aspect of work for me that is spent around this notion of, you know, in time, something may happen, right? And so I use that to my advantage all the time when I do work, because I relieve myself of the pressure of trying to force something into being. And I can think about something, I can dream about something and say that in time, there will be a place for it, maybe, you know, but just knowing that I don't have to force it. And so then there's the time in. That's the time that we get to put into something that we've dreamed up and we've thought about, you know, and that's that glorious period where we get to be excited about doing the work and engaging with people and so on and so forth. But because socially engaged work can only exist in time, there is also that possibility of time out, time running out. You know, what happens when, you know, when the work is no longer relevant, or when there are things that happen that cause it to go out of time. You know, but I also see it as a continuum, that, you know, things go out of time, but it can also be out of time in that space where it's still in time, waiting to roll back into a point of time in. So I'm going to try to, you know, give little examples of that in my experience over the time working, you know, in different projects. But there's another aspect of the time commitment, the time aspect that I always think about too, is like, you know, there's the issue of duration and then intensity. You know, and I think those are really critical to me. I think over the past 20 years, a little over 20 years, I think I've been involved in around 12, 13 different projects. And I can almost look critically at them and think about the duration and the intensity that you know, I participated, the intensity of time that I gave, and have some sense of, and knowing that has some bearings on the level of success of the project for me. You know, it may not be from, you know, an objective view. People may see it outside as being different than I may see it for myself. But this is all kind of what I use for my own critical lens through which I look at my own work. You know, I have to be able to look at it and think about, you know, the quality of time that I put in. You know, whether it's in terms of the duration or the intensity. And that's a really big deal for me. So I'm gonna show you just the Project Row Houses thing briefly, just to say that, you know, I just remember back, you know, prior to 1994, when Project Row Houses, you know, its time was in. There was all this like in time stuff that was going around that was really intense for me. And it was probably one of the most, you know, the most vibrant times of my career, of this possibility. You know, there's so much energy that goes into these possibilities. And then to see it move from that intensity of being a possibility into something that's actually happening, right? So you're actually, you know, working with people, you're working with all the resources that you can corral around you, building relationships, because if the work is about anything, it's about relationships, relationship building, and how do you manage them, and how do you, you know, how do you pay attention to them? Those relationships all rely on your commitment in terms of duration and time, and intensity. So those are, so that's what most people really get excited about, that part, when we're putting in time on the things that we dream about for a while. But what's been interesting about Project Row House is that for me as an artist, I've lived many careers in that project, right? I mean, there have been times where the intensity has been great, and then there's been times when it has not. But the interesting thing about being able to kind of stick within a project and allow yourself to go through that cycle of being, in time it's going to be invigorating and meaningful and exciting. And then you're going to be in it, and it's going to be everything that you dreamed about. And then you're going to go out, and then you're going to feel lost. And like, what does this mean? But then if you can stick around and go back into it, then you get these fruits. Like this image is one that this is representative of one. But this is the person, Sara Richards, that, I met in 1995. She came to the Mother's Program, and to watch this young woman go from someone who was near homeless, had given up basically, and going into that program and working with us and being in our community and transforming herself into someone who ended up going to finishing school at University of Houston, getting a full scholarship to a PhD program at Penn State, finishing there, going to teach at University of Pittsburgh for a while, coming back to Houston to work with us with our programs, to getting appointed by the mayor to the Housing Authority Board and all this stuff, and watch it, being able to be with someone, for 18 years, it's a wonderful thing to be able to kind of see how that stuff happens over time, which is really great. And being with this organization and this effort's been really great because, I've been able to have it as a base with which I can continue to renew myself in my practice and figure out new things as I go along. Now, I'm going to show you just briefly about something, a project that only exists in that in time stage, right? This was a proposal that I was excited about it. The intensity to put this proposal together, excited me to build the relationships with the collaborators to formulate it, as well as the people that we met in the process of thinking about it. It was one of the most exciting things, and it still excites me, but it's still in that stage of perhaps in time it may be able to happen. So this was with a group in Florida that had this idea. They wanted to do this. They wanted to have art engaged, as a part of their community development efforts, and they were doing great community development work, but they wanted to figure out how to have, an artistic component. And what they wanted to do was to utilize these little gateways on the streets that had been blocked off, and they had this idea of putting sculpture there as kind of gateways. And so, but the team that I put together, we talked about this. We responded to the conversations we had with people in the community who were, they were suspicious that when they were bringing in artists, they were only bringing in artists to be a part of the gentrification process. And they were also concerned, their real concern for them was jobs. And they said, if people are going to do something meaningful in this community, they need to figure out how to create jobs. So my team kind of took that into consideration and started to flip the concept that the developers were working with was to take down these little buildings that sat at the areas that they want to have gateways, and we proposed to preserve them. Preserve them in a way that we can end up training people to actually contribute to the aesthetic development of their own community through a process of workshops, training, and so on and so forth, including landscaping as well. And so we were, trying to get them to think about things about how other cultures have done things, how they would paint the buildings in different ways and so on and so forth. And so we just gave them little examples of things, how they could, transform things. But the whole idea was to completely engage not only the people that were interested in the art, but also the people that own the properties. And so to take these little gateway places, and call them zones, in which you have different kinds of things that happen, education zones, employment zones, social zones, recreation zones, and so on and so forth, and then you start to build this thing over time. But in this image here, this kind of shows what we were kind of thinking about of this process, right? That you take an area like this, one of these gateway spots, and you train people to do the painting themselves, right? And you do workshops and you pay them. You make them a part. You make it a part of the flow. Instead of us designing something and fabricating it and delivering it to them, labor that happened outside of the community. Think about how you design something that the people there could actually be the labor to actually put it forth, and also the creative input behind it. And then over time, it can continue to evolve into the things that are much more elaborate and relevant to the people there. So that, that project is something that still exists in my mind, that in time it might happen. And that's one of the things that's key for me with the projects that I work on, is that I think of them as, I see them through the relationship possibilities, not through the manifestation of a thing that I can do, but the relationships. And those things, as long as you have time, as long as time exists, there are always possibilities that something can evolve from it. And I certainly can learn and grow from it as long as I keep it alive in myself. So another project that has manifested itself in time in an interesting way for me is a project that started out that would have not, it was in conjunction with an exhibition for the National Sculpture Center. And we all know that exhibitions have time frames that they exist in, but that's not the way that I think. I mean, I went into it with the notion that, okay, this is an exhibition, so there's a certain time frame, but once the relationships start to build, then there's an opportunity of something that goes in a more complex time situation. But this particular project was in a neighborhood that was very, built in the early 1970s, basically for recent college grads, mostly white. It was very suburban style, where people drove their cars in their apartment complexes and left and that kind of stuff. So there's not a lot of sidewalks, no public amenities, and so on and so forth. But if you flash forward, some nearly 40 years later, the neighborhood has become greatly populated with, not gentrified, it's been greatly populated with refugees from around the world. So from a neighborhood that was at one point mostly all white, now when you walk the streets, you see people from all over the world. And the challenge there is that the design of the neighborhood was not designed for that kind of activity. It was designed for people who drove their cars into their apartment complexes. When they needed something, they drove out into the city to do whatever. Well, most of these refugees and immigrants, their networks are their neighbors and people in adjacent apartment complexes, or they get into the buses and that kind of stuff. And so there was no way, no public access or no public amenities for them to draw upon. And so I started this process of kind of trying to figure out how to understand and build relationships. I built a team of artists from the Dallas community to work with me. And then we spread that group of relationships spread into a broader context to other folks. And we came up with this idea that we would try to use art and culture through the production and the marketing of arts and crafts as a way to bring people together, and also entertainment and so on and so forth. So we ended up getting apartments there and hosting workshops with people, training them how to make things. We ended up having these, market activities and so on and so forth that would happen. And so we turned this little part of the neighborhood into something that was a hub for, kind of creative stuff happening. That not only brought people in the neighborhood together, but also brought people from outside of the neighborhood in. And that was a really kind of an exciting, time. And so during the time of the exhibition, we had these market things that happened that provided kind of the the exhibition kind of, what it addressed the needs of the exhibition component. But it also gave us time to also just continue to build relationships. And so within the market, we had talent shows and things like that, and people from all over performing. But we also took the time to look at building new infrastructures that could add public amenities, right? So we developed this concept of these little white cubes that would host exhibitions and things like that to show work from both inside and outside the neighborhood. So these little spaces became wonderful little spaces that we could just engage people. They were not only useful in the context of exhibition, but they also became like bus shelters and all kinds of things like that. It added public infrastructure to the neighborhood. Now, doing a project like this, in one sense, I could have said, well, this is for the exhibition time frame, and so we can celebrate this, but there were so many relationships that were built. So then the question was, so how do you extend this and really kind of look at these relationships beyond this museum opportunity? And so we started to look into that. But one of the things that we found was that a big part of what we were accomplishing with the work that we were doing and going to Europe, you kind of skipped ahead when we talked about gentrification, and we found out later actually that we were contributing to the gentrification issues that were happening in the area, because this neighborhood had turned into a place that most people considered dangerous and a place to stay away from, to a place that was regularly on, in local media and so on and so forth. And the real estate folks started to take advantage of that, started to harp on that. So we saw movement in people, doing upgrades to apartments and actually, rental prices going up and so on and so forth. So that's where, as an artist, you say, did I cause, have I contributed to this, this problem? But working in it, because of their commitment to the relationships and pushing for more time, it's allowed us to go back and reevaluate what that really meant and how we position it going forward. And I'm really excited about the project now because we've pulled back from the kind of public markets and activities of bringing people into the neighborhood to as a platform for people getting their wares out, to actually training them and working to get their products out into the market outside of the neighborhood without bringing people in. And so I have a great young artist, Carol Zood, who's heading that project up right now. It's been really interesting to watch the project now as I'm, working from afar, and she's working on a day-to-day hands-on, and giving it her sensibilities of how, things have been. So I'm always interested, seeing and hearing, the different shifts and how the formality of the space is shifting, the formality of the relationships with the artisans is shifting, the quality of the production is like going up, and they're getting the work out into museum shops and so on and so forth. So it's been really interesting to see, how working it that way we can see how things kind of evolve over time. Now, then there's this thing about, even for someone like me who's interested in those relationships going on and continuing, there is that point in time when there's time out, right? When time comes to an end. And I'll just show this one image to talk briefly about a project that I was engaged in New Orleans. We ended up calling it Transformer. It happened after Hurricane Katrina. And actually, I owe a great deal of the success of this project was Jess Garst here, who's actually teaching here this summer, who produces this book because she managed the project in New Orleans. And that was a project that started, and we were trying to test this kind of relationship of artists working in kind of disaster situations. And and we had to be disciplined enough to know that we had kind of played it to the end of its time, and the time is out. And so we produced this publication, and we ended this after a 5-year run. Now, and I'm going to close with a couple of projects where, time out can happen in a lot of different ways. And, I think to me, the most important thing is the quality that we spend when we're in the time and stage. Because it's like death, right? I mean, if you attend to the people around you in a way that you feel good about when they leave, you can feel good about it. But if you don't, then you suffer from that. And so, this is a project that happened with an individual. I met this guy. He had been in prison, and ended up working with him over time and trying to help figure out how I could do something with him and help him transform his life in a different way. And just, we ended up talking, and I thought that maybe I would just kind of at least do an image of him to help him kind of see himself differently. And he told me that he always wanted to be, he liked cooking, so he would have liked to have had a cafe or something. And so I went back and I tried to reimagine him as what he might have wanted to be in his most successful sense. And so we ended up doing this poster of him as, him like this really fancy chef guy, and so on and so forth. And that actually led into something that was much greater over time. So, this project went on for about 6 years or 7 years. And he became kind of a little neighborhood celebrity, with this, produced aprons and mugs and caps and all that stuff, and everybody was, gathered around him. And he it was very unfortunate that he died from asthma, and somehow his machine didn't work or something, so he passed away. And that was a real challenging and difficult, thing for me. As you do work and you build relationships, they become real, meaningful. But because I understood that the time that I spent, working with him, it was a great time, for him. So it made it something that was, really something for me to celebrate. Now, I'm going to close on this one because this one is much more challenging for me and is haunting for me, to this day, is the Watts House project, which was formulated through an exhibition at LA MoCA back in 1996. And I built, throughout the exhibition, there was this process of building these relationships with people in Watts that was pretty amazing, and there were relationships that continue to this day. People have always kind of connected with me in a way that had a real value, for both of us. And so, but because you can't spend all of your time on every project that you conceive of, you have to figure out strategies through which you can stay in touch with it, but allow it to continue to go. And therefore, like Carol Zoo in Dallas, but on this one, Edgar Arsenault became the artist here to kind of take this project to a level that I wasn't able to do, and it was really quite wonderful. Some of the relationship that was built during that period, and then there's like this one key relationship to a physical property that to me was critical in this project from my understanding. Because when I first went here in '96, I saw these big little houses here, met the people African Americans who had moved there in the 30s, I think it was, and the woman that lived there, her husband, had built those houses from his own hands, and they were shotgun houses in LA, and it was like a whole poetic, connection here, and so to me that became a point of, a point of really trying to figure out how you speak poetically about the possibilities of developing a project in the context of it. And as the top image there shows a little bit of work that was done to the houses. The second image shows after a significant investment, in the houses. And then, and it was going well, but then there was like a point in which it turned, right? And it was a very challenging time. And actually, this image is from just in January where I went, and those houses are just not there. And so that that project really haunts me because, once again, it's one of those things where, I have to question, what value did this bring, to this community? I mean, that was a major asset for that community, and was it that this project actually led to the demise of that really valuable part? And so it's something that kind of, haunts me to this day, but as I said, though, I believe in this notion that, relationships continue, and so this Watts House project is in a time out moment, but because those relationships still exist, there are still possibilities of time in again. So I'm going to close on this because, I think that, time is a very valuable thing to me in my work, but it's also very complex, and it's always kind of, hard to grapple with the core of it because it's so complex. So anyway, I'll close with that and entertain any questions you have. Thank you.
So we've got about 8 to 10 minutes for some questions if you want to chat with Rick before we head out on the travels.
So just, how do you, the problem I'm facing, initiating engagement in, so I've been with the poor community and trying to do something to help the community. How do you initiate without, I don't know how to ask that question. How do you initiate a dialogue? We don't have, so we're going to have a meeting place and we don't have a meeting place. So any ideas on how to go about that?
Well, to me, I think the most important thing is, I love a big meeting like everybody, right? You have a big meeting and everybody's there and everybody gets excited, whatever. But to me, those are the less important ones. To me, the ones that are most important are the intimate meetings that you can have. And I generally like those because, you can meet people where they are. You can meet them where they are and you get the most genuine response and impact. So, for instance, the project in Dallas, so much of the ways that we connected with people there were, meeting people and people inviting us to their homes for dinner. And that became a great, platform. I worked on a project in Korea that, with students, and we were trying to work with small businesses, and they had this idea that we would have these meetings to get people there. And we realized that, actually, small business owners can't really leave their businesses to go to meetings. So we actually just built teams of people that would go to the businesses. And, you spend time with people where they are. And I think that's the way that you also begin to gain the trust. Yes?
Did you have deadlines for the project? Like, was there money out and it has to be finished by something?
Yeah, I'm always, deadlines, I'm not generally too good with them. Because even when there's no money, actually, was it in 1998, I did a proposal for something that the Fairmont Park Art Association was doing here. I can't remember the title of the initiative, but I ended up being paired with a group that was working in West Philly, and they wanted to do some work around this little street called Main Street, and we weren't selected. But you know what? To this day, I still have conversations with people about Main Street because it's still one of those things. Maybe in time, there are possibilities here, and so there are institutional cutoffs and so on and so forth, but it doesn't necessarily end the relationships. And to me, those relationships actually can ultimately generate institutional support too. So one institution might drop and another might continue. For instance, the project in Dallas, we just had a phone conversation yesterday with the National Sculpture Center and Carol that's there, because they're basically saying, well, this was an exhibition thing that we were doing, and we started that in 2012, it's 2015 now, and so they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. But because we have those relationships, they're valuable. There are other entities that potentially interested in engaging in that project.
There was a question back in the back corner. Someone? No?
Rick, hi. Can you talk a little bit about how you define community? Because I feel like in social practice, it's a word that we use a lot, but its definition can be very different from artist to artist.
I think for me, there's a big part of me that I like to. I often use neighborhood in my work because so often, I'm dealing with geographic areas, and so that's one thing. I will often say neighborhood, and then communities. I have to I kind of define communities as people that have common interests and goals and that kind of stuff. But I also understand the complexity of that as well, right? I mean, I always tell people that I'm a community of myself, right? And I'm constantly fighting. One side of me one day says, oh, you should do this, and then the next day is like, oh, you should, so I'm never completely. Well, I mean, it's rare that I'm in complete agreement with myself. I'm always kind of torn, and I see that as a very real thing in community building, and I think so often we want to kind of have community be really clean and say, oh, this is what the community wants, and it's generally much more complicated than that. And then, so there's a negotiation thing within community about how voice gets to come to the top, and who gets heard and what kinds of things happen. So it's a complicated thing, and I don't have a very defined way. I just have to kind of wrestle with that all the time.
We have time for one more.
I'm really impressed and interested in your long-term commitment to the third ward. And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about the impact of Project Row Houses in the third ward and how you've seen the third ward and that community change over time and its relationship to Project Row Houses.
Yeah, that's actually that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. So I had intended to talk about that a little bit about just the thing with Project Row Houses was that when we started out in that neighborhood in 93, 94-ish, we had a commitment of $25,000 from the National Endowment for the Arts and a group of ragtag volunteers. And folks in that area were saying that was the largest investment that had happened in that community for years, right? So just $25,000 and some volunteers. And now if you come forward, some 20 years later, now our neighborhood park is undergoing a $38 million renovation. So it's just like completely changed, the dynamics here. And so we could build relationships, as an entity with $25,000 in volunteers that could meet the needs at that time. But now building relationships to deal with the challenges now, where real estate has jumped in that same relation, right, from like $1 a square foot to $40 a square foot over time. So everything is kind of ramped up, right? And so, so it's been interesting, and it's an interesting time, for Project Row Houses to figure out how to offer some of the same things that we offered, 20 plus years ago, of building relationships and coordinating resources that the community doesn't necessarily have access to. That becomes a big part. And so, to those ends, we're currently in a planning process through which we have a group of students from MIT that's kind of helping us, work through some stuff. And what's been really interesting and telling about this is that we had our last meeting, it occurred to me that we had a number of church leaders in our meeting, and it just occurred to me, it's like, churches generally are much better at being the advocate for community change, historically, in the Black community. In the Black community, the churches were historically the vanguard for, all the political and community issues and stuff. But now they're not. And it was interesting to see that all those church leaders were sitting there looking to us, saying, so you tell us, you help us figure out how to do this. So it's been interesting to see that kind of, to see how Project Row has kind of moved itself throughout these years and have become, truly not just the kind of creative entity on the outside, but that people are looking at and saying that, if the neighborhood is going to withstand the gentrification that's happening, it's going to, that they're investing in Project Row houses to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick Lowe, once again. Also want to acknowledge and thank Jane Golden for her opening remarks, members of the Moore community, to all the Mural Arts staff who are here, and all of the rest of you. We look forward to spending more time